It began as a whisper, a rumor that the old empire was finally breaking. For centuries, the Ottoman flag had ruled over the Balkans, from snow-capped mountains to sunlit shores. But by 1912, that flag no longer commanded fear, only resentment. Tiny nations that once bowed to the Sultan now stood ready to challenge him. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro, four neighbors bound by faith, divided by history, united by one goal: to drive the Ottomans out of Europe forever. But behind that unity lay pride, jealousy, and revenge. This wasn't just a war for freedom, it was a struggle for identity, for land, and for power. When the first cannon roared in the Balkan hills, the world didn't realize it was hearing the first echo of the Great War to come. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks, the cracking empire. Empires rarely fall with thunder, they fade in silence first. By 1912, the Ottoman Empire still covered vast lands on paper. Its power was crumbling, its armies were exhausted, its coffers empty, its people divided. In the Balkans, old nations stirred awake: Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and tiny Montenegro, each carrying centuries of resentment. They called the Ottomans the sick man of Europe, and the diagnosis was fatal. The Young Turk reformers promised rebirth, but corruption ran deeper than reform. Taxes crushed the poor, while officers stole from the treasury. The empire was still enormous, but hollow. Across the borders, whispers grew louder. Serbia dreamed of uniting the South Slavs. Bulgaria longed to reclaim its medieval glory. Greece wanted the ancient cities once ruled by Byzantium. Even little Montenegro felt destined to strike the final blow. Their ambitions collided in secret meetings, guided by Russia. Out of rivalry was born a fragile alliance, the Balkan League. Four flags, one enemy. On the 8th of October 1912, Montenegro fired the first cannon. Within days, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece followed. For the first time in centuries, four Christian kingdoms marched together against the empire that had ruled them all. Inside Constantinople, officials promised swift victory, but fear hung in the air. Trains carried soldiers with no boots, guns with no shells, generals with no plan. In cafes and mosques alike, people prayed for a miracle. The Ottoman Empire, once the terror of Europe, now fought for its life. Its enemies called it justice. Its soldiers called it duty. But history would call it what it truly was: the beginning of the end. Lightning in the mountains. The cannons of October 1912 did more than start a war, they awakened centuries of buried rage. Serbia moved first. At Kumanovo, Ottoman lines broke under relentless fire. 2 days later, the Serbs stood victorious, their road into Macedonia open. They marched south through villages that still carried scars of past rebellions, believing history itself marched beside them. To the east, Bulgaria unleashed its massive Thracian army, 500,000 men advancing with grim precision. At Kirkkilis, the Ottomans collapsed. At Lulburgas, 6 days of shellfire turned the plains to ash. When the smoke cleared, the road to Constantinople lay bare. In the south, Greece attacked through the mountains of Epirus, while its navy struck at sea. On December 3rd, the cruiser Avarov crushed the Ottoman fleet at Ely, locking the Dardanelles and isolating every Ottoman army west of the Straits. For the first time in centuries, the Aegean was a Greek sea. Yet, behind the victories, the war's cost was immense. Frozen roads swallowed the wounded, supplies failed. Soldiers fought in rags and silence, their faith stronger than their stomachs. Across the front, peasants and priests fought side by side, convinced that every bullet carried divine justice. The Ottomans tried to rally, but confusion ruled. Commanders disagreed, orders vanished, and the empire bled from within. Each retreat revealed another truth: they were no longer feared, only pitied. By November, the Balkan League had swept across the map like fire on dry grass. But even as they shared the field, the Allies were already measuring spoils. Serbia eyed the Adriatic. Bulgaria demanded Macedonia. Greece guarded the Aegean. Unity had won them victories, but ambition would soon tear that unity apart. The Siege of Adrianople. By winter 1912, the war had reached its darkest hour. The Ottoman army, beaten and retreating, gathered behind the mighty walls of Adrianople Edirne, once a royal capital of the sultans. Inside waited 70,000 soldiers, surrounded by hunger and frost. Outside, the Bulgarian and Serbian armies formed a ring of steel, determined to take the city no matter the cost. The siege became a test of endurance more than strength. For months, shells fell daily, turning markets into craters. Inside the walls, bread was rationed, water ran black, and civilians died beside soldiers. Yet the Ottoman commander, Shukri Pasha, refused to surrender. "We will fight," he vowed, "until our last breath." Above the city, something new appeared, fragile biplanes, buzzing like insects. They dropped small bombs and took photographs from the sky. Europe watched in awe. It was the dawn of aerial warfare. Adrianople had become both the last battle of an old world and the first glimpse of a new one. Then came March 1913. Bulgarian artillery opened fire with a roar that shook the earth. For 2 days, the barrage never stopped. When the guns fell silent, infantry charged through smoke and snow. Street by street, the defenders fell back. By nightfall, white flags fluttered from shattered walls. Adrianople had fallen. The empire's heart was gone. In Constantinople, silence replaced speeches. An empire that had conquered Europe now watched its old capital lie in ashes. To many, this was not just defeat, it was destiny fulfilled. For 500 years, the Ottomans had ruled the Balkans. In 5 months, the Balkans had taken it all back. The old world had finally cracked open. While armies clashed across the frozen plains of Thrace, another battle raged beyond sight on the restless waters of the Aegean Sea. For centuries, these waves had carried Ottoman sails, but in 1912, those same waters turned against them. The Greek navy, led by Admiral Pavlos Kountouriotis, sailed with a purpose that outshone its size. At its heart was the armored cruiser Avarov, fast, modern, and fearless. On December 3rd, the Ottoman fleet emerged from the Dardanelles. The sea was calm, the morning bright. At 9:30 a.m., the Avarov broke formation and charged ahead alone. Her guns thundered across the waves. In less than an hour, the Battle of Ely was over. Ottoman ships limped back into the straits, leaving the Aegean in Greek hands. The victory was more than strategic, it was symbolic. It severed the empire's supply lines, isolating its armies in Europe, and it rekindled ancient pride. For the first time in centuries, Greek flags flew freely across the islands: Lesbos, Chios, Lemnos, and more. But the Ottomans would not give up the sea without one last fight. On January 5, 1913, they struck again at the Battle of Lemnos. The clash was fierce, but short. Once more, the Avarov outmaneuvered the enemy and crushed the fleet. From that moment, the Aegean belonged entirely to Greece. The sea had spoken, and its verdict was final. Without control of the water, the Ottoman Empire's European armies were cut off, starving in silence. Constantinople, once a city that ruled 2 continents, was now a besieged capital surrounded by land and sea. The empire that had once conquered by ship now drowned in its own history. By the spring of 1913, the Ottoman Empire was breathing its last. The Balkans tribes it had ruled for centuries were gone, lost city by city, fort by fort. What remained was a broken army, a grieving people, and an empire too proud to admit defeat. In Constantinople, ministers argued as the walls trembled from distant guns. Some urged surrender, others demanded one last defense. But there were no reinforcements left, no ships, no hope. So, the empire turned to diplomacy and to Europe. In May 1913, the great powers gathered in London to decide the Balkans' fate. Around polished tables, diplomats carved the Ottoman corpse with steady hands. The Treaty of London stripped the empire of nearly all its European territory. Albania was declared independent. Macedonia, Epirus, and Thrace were divided among the victors. Only a small strip around Constantinople remained Ottoman. 500 years of empire were erased in a single meeting. When the news reached Istanbul, the call to prayer echoed through a city that suddenly felt smaller and older. Soldiers returned home in silence, limping through streets that no longer believed in them. But victory did not bring peace. Serbia demanded access to the Adriatic, Bulgaria wanted Macedonia, and Greece refused to yield her gains. The same allies who had fought together now turned their eyes on each other's lands. Suspicion replaced celebration. The fires of war had only been smothered, not extinguished. For the Ottomans, it was over. For the Balkans, it was only beginning. The empire had fallen, but its collapse had set loose a storm that would soon engulf them all. The guns fell silent, but peace never arrived. The First Balkan War had ended, yet the air still reeked of smoke and vengeance. The victors, drunk on triumph, now turned their anger on one another. The same flags that once flew side by side now faced each other across new borders, drawn in ink and arrogance. Bulgaria, proud of its victories, felt betrayed. It believed Macedonia belonged to its crown, not to Serbia or Greece. Serbia, blocked from the Adriatic by Austria-Hungary, burned with resentment. Greece, triumphant at sea, guarded its islands with suspicion. The unity that had shattered an empire dissolved into mistrust and greed. In June 1913, Bulgaria struck first, launching a surprise attack on its former ally. allies. The Second Balkan War had begun a war born from pride rather than survival. Within weeks, Serbia and Greece joined forces, crushing Bulgaria's exhausted troops. From the east, the Ottomans saw their chance and retook Adrianople, reclaiming a fragment of their old glory. The map of the Balkans bled once again. When it was over, none of the victors looked like winners. Borders shifted, cities burned, and the people, farmers, widows, children paid the price of every ambition. The Balkan dream of unity died before it could draw breath. And yet, the echoes of these wars did not stop at the mountains. They reached Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg, where the great powers studied the chaos and drew their own plans. Just 1 year later, a single gunshot in Sarajevo would ignite the fire that consumed the world. The First Balkan War was the prologue to that inferno, the final rehearsal before the Great War began. History remembers wars through borders and victories, but the First Balkan War was more than a clash of armies. It was a turning point in the human story. It showed how ambition can unite nations for a moment and destroy them the next. It ended 500 years of Ottoman rule in Europe, yet it also ended the fragile balance that had kept Europe from tearing itself apart. For the Ottoman Empire, this was the beginning of the end. The fall of Edirne, the loss of Macedonia, and the humiliation of surrender carved scars that would never heal. But for the Balkan nations, victory came at a terrible cost. What was gained in land was lost in trust. Every border drawn in 1913 became a wound that would bleed again in 1914, and later in 1941 and beyond. In the villages left behind, soldiers' names were carved into stone, their graves unmarked, but their absence eternal. Mothers whispered the same question history always asks after war: was it worth it? The answer never comes. The First Balkan War was supposed to free the region. Instead, it bound it to a fate of endless conflict. Its gunfire echoed far beyond the mountains, reaching the capitals of Europe, where leaders misread its warning. They did not see the spark in the Balkans for what it was, the fire that would soon engulf the world. And when the world burned in 1914, it burned along the same fault lines drawn here. Empires rise, empires fall, but history never truly ends. It waits in silence until someone listens. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks. If you believe history should be told not just as facts, but as stories of people, voices, and choices, then subscribe, share, and remember, because the past still speaks, and it's speaking to us.